Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Spare Change. This will be Part 2, Chapter 2. A week, and a crap ton of paperwork later, Midoriya was officially enrolled at UA as a general studies student. Aizawa, surprisingly enough, had been heavily involved with the details of his transfer, even writing his own recommendation letter for Midoriya's transcript, to which Midoriya promptly cried over. Midoriya-san, Inko, had also come by their house to thank them personally, as if they had any part in Midoriya getting into UA. Aizawa might have made him aware of it, but it was Midoriya's grades that actually got him into UA. His hard work, his dedication to learning, it was all coming to fruition. And not because of Aizawa or Hitoshi, but because of himself. His file had been submitted as early as that Monday and processed by Friday, so the upcoming Monday would be Midoriya's first day, officially. Currently it was Saturday, and Hitoshi was over at Midoriya's apartment, helping him prepare for his first day of class. "When you said you'd come over and help me, I thought you really meant you'd help me. This is not helping," Midoriya said, his tone slightly amused. Hitoshi's arms tightened around his waist in defiance, squeezing a breathless giggle out of him in return. He had somehow managed to convince Midoriya to cuddle with him for 10 minutes before they actually started working, because they had all weekend to work, and they only had this moment with each other now. Or some version of that. Well, 10 minutes had passed 2 hours ago, and Hitoshi was relentless, clingy, and annoying. He could keep this up for forever. "What do we need to do? Tell me, and I'll do it all for you," he mumbled into his hair. "I just want to stay like this. I'm so lazy." Midoriya snorted a little chuckle. Hitoshi smiled. "You're the worst helper on earth," he said, wiggling around until Hitoshi eventually, very begrudgingly, let him go. Midoriya sat up on the bed, hair a wild mess, and his cheek pink from where it was pressed against Hitoshi's chest. "Okay, so I want to clean out my backpack and look over my class schedule, and then I want to try on my uniform, just to see if it fits. My mom said she'd make any adjustments if she has to." Midoriya petered off suddenly, and Hitoshi wondered if he'd apologize for talking too much. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Hitoshi blinked, smoothing out his expression instinctively. "How am I looking at you?" Like, I don't know. You were just smiling and watching me. Am I being silly? I'm just a little nervous." Hitoshi sat up mid-sentence, grabbed Midoriya's face, and kissed himself stupid. Yes, himself. "I just think you're really cute, that's all," he said, their foreheads pressed together. He could feel his face beginning to burn. It was hard being so vocally affectionate, but Midoriya had mentioned once that it was something he liked, so he was trying his best. "And you're not being silly. I just like to cuddle." Midoriya's own face was gradually turning a little pink. "I see that," he giggled. "Can we get started now?" "Fine," Hitoshi sighed, sneaking in one final peck before getting serious. "Let's see your backpack. It can't be that bad." Midoriya huffed while scooting off the bed to retrieve his backpack that hung from his door. "It's not. I just have a hard time throwing stuff away. You'll see." And see he did. Midoriya's backpack wasn't messy by any means, but it was stuffed to the brim with old homework and even older notebooks. He had always wondered what made Midoriya's backpack feel so heavy, and now, maybe he knew the exact reason. Midoriya was a bit of an emotional hoarder. Not that he would ever say it out loud, because 1, he thought it was cute, and 2, he wasn't sure how Midoriya would take to being called a hoarder, even if he was a cute one. "So, why can't we throw away your math homework from first year?" "Because this is the homework we were doing when we held hands for the first time." And it was a different variation of that every time. Hitoshi didn't have the heart to tell him anything otherwise, so now, instead of keeping old scraps of homework in his backpack, he was keeping them in his desk. After they'd finished with his backpack, which was now considerably lighter than it was before, they quickly went over Midoriya's class schedule, and who his homeroom teacher would be, and where exactly his class was located, just to avoid any further first-day panic. Then, finally, it was time Midoriya actually tried on his uniform. There was sort of this rumor, or perhaps an old saying by UA alum, that whoever put on the UA uniform would instantly become like 10 times more attractive than they already were. And yes, maybe it was just a silly rumor started by old UA students with crushes too big for their hearts, but Hitoshi kind of understood them. He'd pictured Midoriya in the uniform about a dozen times beforehand, so this was truly a dream come true. "Okay, you can turn around now," Midoriya said, his voice slightly trembling. Hitoshi spun around in his office chair until he was fully facing him. and then nearly fell out of his seat promptly after. "What do you think? It kind of feels like I'm wearing a costume." What did he think? Hitoshi couldn't even put into real, coherent words what he thought. Midoriya looked. There wasn't a word for it. Perfect was too flippant, and beautiful wasn't even close. Hitoshi was bad enough with words already. What was he supposed to do when Midoriya quite literally took every word he ever knew and scrambled them into nonsense? I really don't know what to say, Hitoshi said, slowly standing from his chair and approaching a sheepish Midoriya. That bad? No, he insisted, grabbing his face, forcing him to look him in the eyes. That good. It's really good. You just honestly made my brain explode. Midoriya snorted and rolled his eyes, softly smacking him in the chest. You're ridiculous. It's just a uniform. Hitoshi shrugged, dropping his hands from his face and wrapping his arms around his waist instead, pulling him closer until they were pressed together. It's you, I think, he mumbled, closing the inch between them, kissing him slowly and deliberately. You're great. Midoriya's face was red, but he was so obviously unconvinced. I'm gonna change out of it before I tear it or something, he said, pulling away from the embrace and giving himself a once-over. Luckily, my mom doesn't have to make any adjustments. It fits perfectly. It looks perfect. Enough! Midoriya made quick work of changing out of his uniform, tucking it back into his dresser, and then promptly crawling back into bed with Hitoshi. Despite Aizawa's beliefs, all Hitoshi and Midoriya ever did behind closed doors was sleep or cuddle, and sometimes the occasional make-out session, but things like that should honestly be expected of them. They were young and dating. It was sure to happen eventually, but Aizawa seemed to want to delay the inevitable as much as possible. Which was why Hitoshi much preferred hanging out at Midoriya's apartment rather than at his own house. At least Ingo-san let them close the door. Hell, at least she let them hang out in Midoriya's room, period. Aizawa freaked out if they even got a little too close while sitting on the living room sofa. Hitoshi got annoyed just thinking about it. He held Midoriya a little closer, kissing the top of his head just for good measure. Midoriya hummed, his eyes shut, and his face relaxed. They were bound to fall asleep sooner or later. It was around that time for them anyway. Am I going to meet your friends on Monday? Hitoshi blinked. Or maybe not. Well, you've already met most of them. Ashido, Kaminari, Jiro. Remember them? Midoriya giggled. Yeah, I do. They were fun, he said. But, I mean, your other friends, the rest of your class. Oh, Hitoshi said. Yeah, you can meet them too. We can walk to my class in the morning so you can meet everyone, and then I'll walk you back to yours before the bell rings. How does that sound? Midoriya nodded against his chest. That sounds good, he said. Did I get to meet anyone else in your class, like, at the dance, I mean? Hitoshi frowned, and then abruptly stopped himself from overthinking it. Midoriya was nervous. Of course he wanted to know who he was meeting. It was only natural, especially for him. You met Todoroki, he's in my class, but he mostly just keeps to himself. Ida, Uraraka, Hagekure, Ojiro, basically anyone Ashido dragged you around to meet is in my class, except for a few Class B students, he deduced, and then remembered another sour detail from that night at the dance. They gave you their numbers, didn't they? You haven't been in touch with them? I was too nervous. I never contacted any of them, Midoriya confessed, completely unaware of Hitoshi's blissful triumph. Take that, Ashido. So, there's only 2 Hero Course classes. How many students are in each class? 20, so it's 40 Hero students. Oh, I should be okay then. Hitoshi blinked at the ceiling, slightly perturbed by this. Why wouldn't you be okay? Midoriya seemed to startle at the question, his body flinching against Hitoshi's. He held him a little tighter. No, I just mean, so I'm not too overwhelmed meeting so many people all at once. And I've already met most of them, so it'll be fine. Everything will be fine. Hitoshi frowned a little at his tone, how unconvinced he sounded. Besides the obvious, what was making him so nervous? He wanted to ask, but he wasn't sure if he could. Let's nap now. I'm sleepy. Hitoshi blinked, slightly troubled by his abrupt dismissal, but ultimately decided not to comment on it. If Midoriya, for whatever reason, said he was okay, then Hitoshi would have to trust that he was telling the truth. Okay, he said, throwing the concern to the back of his mind for now. Let's sleep. It was Monday, 6 o'clock in the morning, the sun barely making its way over the horizon, and Hitoshi was already up and ready to start the day, which in itself was unusual. He couldn't remember the last time he actually woke up on time for school, least of all on a Monday. This Monday was different, though. Very, very different and special. This Monday was Midoriya's first day at UA. Starting today, he would officially be considered a UA student. Starting today, everything would be a little different. But Hitoshi was ready. He was more than ready. He was excited? Nervous? It was all good feelings, all positive. He was just antsy to see Midoriya, mostly. "Come on, Eri, you're going to make us late," Hitoshi urged, slightly jostling his sister's arm as she sluggishly dragged her feet to the car. "Don't you want to see Midoriya? He's coming with us today." They'd decided, and by they, he meant Midoriya's mother and Aizawa, that carpooling would be the quickest way of transportation for everyone involved. And it only made sense for them to carpool, anyway, seeing as it was Aizawa's idea to have him attend UA in the first place. They kind of owed him a ride in retrospect, and it worked out for Hitoshi in the end, so he wasn't complaining. More time with Midoriya was always encouraged, and always appreciated. "Nii-chan?" Eri perked, the horn on her head literally glimmering. "Papa, why is Nii-chan coming with us today?" Their father deliberately sipped on his coffee, his scarf covering the better half of his face. Aizawa was not a morning person, by any means, and whether Eri knew this or not, she was probably the only person on Earth who was brave enough to approach Aizawa Shota in the mornings. Not that Aizawa would ever have the heart to snap at Eri. At Hitoshi, sure, plenty of times, but never Eri. "Because, starting today, he's going to be a UA student, like your brother," Aizawa said, placing his coffee mug on the roof of the car and helping Eri with her seatbelt. "So we'll see him every morning now, too?" Eri asked, grabbing Aizawa's face, showing off just how much power she truly had. "Yep, every morning, Princess." Hitoshi busied himself in the front seat, whipping out his phone and quickly texting Midoriya, obviously. "Hi, good morning. How'd you sleep?" "Well, I didn't really. I was too nervous." "Aw, dude. I told you there's nothing to be worried about. Also, we're on our way to get you." "There was just no way I wasn't going to worry about this, but I appreciate you. Also, I've been ready for hours. Thanks, anxiety." Hitoshi snorted, rolling his eyes fondly at the text, before typing out one last final message and shutting off his phone. He'd see him soon enough anyway. "Texting Midoriya?" Aizawa's voice suddenly cut in from the driver's seat. "What's he saying?" Hitoshi shrugged. Aizawa would never admit it out loud, but he really cared for Midoriya and his well-being, as well as his mother's. It was nice, and kind of unexpected, but Midoriya did that to people. "He's just nervous," he replied. Aizawa hummed, turning into Midoriya's street. The walk to his apartment was short, and the drive was even shorter. "Kid has nothing to worry about. He has you, and me if I'm needed, but I trust you can handle it if things go south." "Of course. That's my boy." "There's Nii-chan," Eri squealed, thrashing around in her booster seat, tapping on her window, trying to get Midoriya's attention. Aizawa rolled down his own window as Inko-san approached the driver's side, Midoriya going the opposite way into the back seat, sitting beside Eri. "Good morning, Aizawa-san, Hitoshi-kun. I hope you don't mind, but I went ahead and made you both bento boxes for lunch as a thank you." She sheepishly offered them the bentos through the window, to which Aizawa quickly accepted. "I can't express how grateful I am to the both of you for looking out for Izuku. Really, thank you." "The pleasure's all mine, Inko-san," Aizawa said. "We'll look after him today." "Thank you." The woman smiled guiltily, peering over their shoulders and at Midoriya, sitting in the back seat. "Have a good first day, Izuku. I love you." Midoriya made a sound akin to a squeak. He might have been embarrassed, but Hitoshi thought it was sweet. The Midoriyas were a very sentimental little family. He'd learned that upon meeting Midoriya's mother for the first time. She'd cried uncontrollably for about 10 minutes before he could even get a word in. "Love you too, Mom," he said, waving until they drove out of the street and back onto the main road. Hitoshi brazenly watched from the rearview mirror. Midoriya caught his eye, and the two of them shared a secret smile. "Thank you for picking me up today, Aizawa-san." "No problem, kid." "Nii-chan!" Eri squealed, reaching over and grabbing Midoriya's hand. "Good morning. I can't believe we get to see each other in the mornings now." Hitoshi squinted at them through the mirror, jealous. "I'm here too." "Nobody cares about you," Eri said without missing a beat. Aizawa actually chuckled, much to Hitoshi's dismay. "Don't laugh. She's being rude." Even Midoriya was giggling. Meanwhile, Eri looked more than pleased with herself. Why did everyone hate him? "You too, Midoriya." "Hitoshi, she's a kid. Get over it." Aizawa sighed, still slightly smiling. "You were the same way when you were her age." Hitoshi rolled his eyes, miffed. "Whatever." For the first time in his entire life, Hitoshi wished he was already at school. After they dropped off Eri at school, the rest of the drive had been fairly quiet. Not that any of them were especially extroverted, but Hitoshi could practically feel the anxiety rolling off Midoriya, and came to the conclusion that the stuffy silence had an actual reason this time around. Aizawa dropped them off at the front entrance, similarly to the night of the dance, and wished Midoriya one final good luck before pulling into the underground teacher parking garage. "I'm going to throw up," was the first thing out of Midoriya's mouth. Hitoshi withheld a smile. "Good morning to you, too." He linked their pinkies, hoping to ebb some of his anxiety. Midoriya groaned, slapping a palm against his forehead. "Sorry, hi. I'm such a mess right now." "You're fine," Hitoshi said, caressing his knuckles, attempting to comfort him. He always wished there was more he could do. "Let me know when you're ready to head in. There's no rush. We're here pretty early." "No, I'm ready now," Midoriya nodded, his lips trembling. "I just want to get it over with. If we don't go now, I might start running." Hitoshi smiled encouragingly, firmly linking their hands together and slowly leading them towards the massive front doors. "Okay, sure. Whatever you want." Also, I think I want to meet my class first, before I meet yours, if that's okay." They'd made it through the front doors just as Midoriya finished making his request. What he wanted wasn't impossible. In fact, it was very doable, but Hitoshi figured when they'd made their plan, they'd stick to it. It wasn't upsetting. He was just confused by the sudden reluctance, but he didn't want to push. He didn't want to be that guy. He wouldn't be that guy. "Okay, that's fine. We can all meet up at lunch. How does that sound?" he said instead of interrogating. Midoriya's face visibly relaxed, his muscles slackening. "That sounds great, thanks." They stopped in front of classroom 2C, Midoriya's new homeroom. Luckily, General Studies was located on the first floor, so not much walking was involved for him. "I'll see you at lunch, then." Hitoshi nodded, quickly stealing a kiss before the hallways became busy with students. Midoriya squeaked, face erupting, a dark red color. "I'll come get you when it's time for lunch. Good luck. You got this," he said, ignoring how hot his own face felt after the short exchange. "Thanks," Midoriya muttered, ducking his head and then offering a short wave before quickly entering his homeroom, leaving Hitoshi to dawdle on his own. Oh, hey, where is he? I thought you said today was his first day." Hitoshi had decided to dawdle all the way to his homeroom and realized what a mistake that was far too late. It was way too early to be dealing with Ashido and Kaminari's nonsense. Hitoshi found a seat and hunkered down, not at all perturbed by the insistent presence of his friends surrounding his desk. He was too used to this by now. "It is his first day. He's in class right now. You'll see him at lunch." "Ugh, but lunch is so far away," Kaminari groaned. "I know," Hitoshi frowned. He'd had his own reservations about having to wait until lunch to see his boyfriend, but he hadn't said them out loud in fear of Midoriya taking it the wrong way. But Midoriya wasn't here now, so he could sulk as much as he wanted. Jiro snorted, nudging his arm. "Look at you, all mopey over your boyfriend. I can't wait to meet the guy who's managed to make this happen." "I can't wait to meet him, period. It's been so long since I last saw him," Ashido whined. "Is he going to sit with us at lunch, or is he going to eat lunch with his class?" Hitoshi frowned. That was a good question. He'd have to ask, especially with Midoriya being so anxious at the moment. He wasn't sure if their plan was so foolproof anymore. "I'll ask," he said, whipping out his phone and typing out a text to Midoriya, just to double-check they were still on for lunch. "Who are you guys talking about?" Sero and Kirishima approached from behind, occupying the empty seats around Hitoshi's desk. "I need some juicy gossip. I've had the worst morning ever." Hitoshi rolled his eyes at Sero and smiled to himself once Midoriya confirmed their lunch date, before slipping his phone back into his pocket. "There's no gossip, just love all around," Ashido sighed, dramatically draping herself over a desk. "Ugh, I wish I had a boyfriend. Don't you wish you had a boyfriend, Bakugo?" "No," Bakugo muttered darkly, "because unlike you idiots, my main priority is to be the #1 hero, not date." Hitoshi rolled his eyes so far back into his head it hurt. He and Bakugo had never truly seen eye to eye with one another. Their personalities were just too intense for all the wrong reasons, and they always ended up clashing. Not that Bakugo was an easy person to get along with anyway. Hitoshi was a delight, thank you very much. "Come on, Bakugo, don't be like that," Kirishima said, maybe the only person in their class to actually care about Bakugo in the slightest. "You're just jealous," Kaminari concluded dismissively. "Yeah? And why don't you kiss my ass, Sparky? Why don't you all kiss my ass, including your dumbass boyfriend, eyebags?" Suddenly, a tense hush went over the classroom, their classmates looking back and forth between Bakugo and him, as if they were expecting a fight to break out. If Hitoshi was less mature, he might have hopped over his desk and gave Bakugo exactly what he deserved. But alas, he had some semblance of self-control. Hitoshi instead glared at him from his seat. Prick. Bakugo rolled his eyes, turning away from him. Loser. And so is the freak who's dating you. This time, a majority of the class bristled. They'd met Midoriya. Or they at least knew who he was. They knew how kind, how gentle he was with everyone, even the worst people. Bakugo, not cool. Zero frowned. Yeah, dude, Kaminari scoffed. This is exactly why you failed the provisional licensing exam. Oh, shut up. It was a joke, Bakugo snapped, practically snarling at Kaminari. Stop talking to me, goddamn idiots. Hitoshi sneered, thoroughly pissed off, and honestly one more word away from actually storming up to him. But then his father walked in, and he sort of had to let it go, just for the time being. Aizawa always did say, if there were ever any personal issues between classmates, to handle them out on the field during hero training. And Hitoshi might have to take him up on that. 3 hours of math, English, and traditional Japanese lessons later, the bell had finally rung for lunch, and Hitoshi had never felt such relief in his life. Being locked in a classroom with Bakugo after their little spat had been mentally exhausting. Trying not to lose his cool in front of everyone, most of all, his dad, was torture. But at least now he got a break, and he got to see Midoriya, which was a plus, a very big plus. As soon as the bell had rung, Hitoshi was out of his seat and rushing down the stairs to the first floor, straight to Midoriya's classroom. He invited himself in once he'd made it, too antsy to wait for him by the door. Midoriya had his back turned to him, busily packing away his things in his backpack, completely unaware of his surroundings. Hitoshi's chest fluttered, suddenly a little nervous. Midoriya still did that to him, more often than not. Hey, he said, as casually as he possibly could, walking up from behind and putting on an easy smile. Midoriya startled, his eyes blowing a little wide, before he realized who'd called to him. Suddenly, he was smiling and everything was okay again. Hi, he sighed, swinging his backpack over his shoulders. I missed you. Hitoshi bit the inside of his cheek to keep himself from smiling too hard. That was always so great to hear. I missed you too. So, how was it? He intertwined their fingers and led them back out through the door, towards the lunchroom. Midoriya nodded, his eyes trained on their hands. It was good. My classmates are nice, and so is my teacher. It was really good. Hitoshi's smile widened, jostling their hands a little, proud beyond words. See? I told you. You had nothing to worry about. Yeah, Midoriya said, noticeably absent in his words. Hitoshi squeezed around his fingers, hoping it would encourage him to open up. Because something was still clearly bothering him. All he had to do was say the words. Are we going to lunch now? Hitoshi attempted desperately not to let it show that this upset him, and Midoriya didn't seem to trust him with whatever was making him feel uncomfortable or troubled. And he could ask, and this would probably end as a misunderstanding on his part, but he wanted Midoriya to want to confide in him. Maybe he was being dramatic. Probably. Yes, we are. Hungry? Midoriya hummed. A little. As they continued on with their usual banter, Hitoshi led them back to the third floor and back to his classroom, in his haste to get Midoriya on time. He'd completely forgotten about the bento box sitting in his backpack, and he was not going to let Inko-san's efforts go to waste, plus her food was amazing. Is this the way to the lunchroom? Midoriya suddenly asked, quickly glancing around the hallway at Class B's door, and then towards Class A. This is your class? Why are we here? Yeah, sorry, I forgot my bento in my backpack. It'll be quick, though. Hitoshi reached for the door, and then jolted at the sudden resistance from Midoriya, who stood stiff as a board behind him, face pale as a ghost. Hitoshi quickly faced him, his expression creasing with concern. Midoriya? Hey, what's wrong? Nothing. I'll just wait out here. But... The door abruptly slammed open. Ugh, move out of the fucking way, eyebags. Hitoshi exhaled a patient breath. Bakugo was the last person he wanted to see. In any situation, really. He couldn't imagine how Bakugo could ever make something better. Go round, asshole, he snapped, glaring at him over his shoulder, and balking at the look on his face. He wore almost the same expression as Midoriya, except somehow worse. His skin was paler than usual, eyes wild, mouth agape, and staring right through him, and at Midoriya. Hitoshi choked down the bile rising in his throat and looked back at Midoriya, who seemed to be on the brink of a panic attack. What the fuck? Bakugo muttered. Midoriya bristled, ducking his head. What the fuck? Hitoshi's earlier anger resurfaced tenfold. He turned to face Bakugo again, practically on the verge of tears. What's your problem? You can go. He sounded less angry and more Insecure than anything. God, he might genuinely throw up. Bakugo seemed to snap out of his daze, blinking hard twice. His signature scowl replaced the bewildered expression on his face, and yet it lacked any of its usual heat. He was shaken. For whatever reason, the sight of Midoriya had managed to shift Bakugo Katsuki off kilter. He brushed past them silently, his footsteps echoing throughout the empty hallway. Hitoshi exhaled a long breath, his chest tight, and his eyes hot. He looked to Midoriya, desperate for an explanation, for anything. Do you know Bakugo? He couldn't help but ask. It would have been utterly ridiculous if he hadn't, with the show they'd both put on right in front of him. Screw boundaries for the time being. Hitoshi wanted to know. He needed to know. Midoriya lifted his head, his eyes anywhere but on him. No, I don't, he said quietly, and then smiled sourly. I thought we were here for your lunch. Hitoshi's heart sank to his stomach. Midoriya was lying. So clearly lying, he knew it. And Hitoshi knew it. And there was nothing he could do about it. At least, it felt that way. Hitoshi nodded and released Midoriya's hand. Right. I'll be quick. He stepped into the empty classroom and talked himself out of his own panic attack. The rest of the week felt as if it would drag on forever. Midoriya met his friends, and they ate their lunch together, and went to and from school together. They did homework, and hung out at Hitoshi's house, spent time with Eri. It was nice to be able to spend so much time with him. It was really nice, in fact. It just would have been better if the tension between Bakugo and Midoriya wasn't so viscerally palpable every time they were so much as near each other. Hitoshi couldn't stand it, having to ignore it, pretending that he didn't notice, pretending that he didn't care. And worst of all, Midoriya had yet to tell him the truth of it, that the two of them did know each other, and obviously had history with one another. He'd waited since Monday, waited for Midoriya to pull him aside and just come clean to him about everything. Whatever everything entailed, Hitoshi was beyond the point of caring. He just wanted to know. But it was Friday afternoon now, and Midoriya seemed content on ignoring the elephant in the room for as long as he possibly could. Hitoshi couldn't continue on like this. He'd go crazy coming up with new theories and scenarios. He just needed the truth. Was that so bad? Hitoshi waited until they were both completely alone. Aizawa and Eri had gone off to the grocery store some minutes earlier, leaving the two of them to continue on with their homework. There would not be a better time to ask than now. Midoriya. His voice became tremulous, and he hoped it didn't sound as bad as it felt coming out. Midoriya looked up from his homework, his eyes imploring from across the table. Yeah? Are you stuck on a question? No, actually. This doesn't have anything to do with homework, Hitoshi said, trying to find the conviction to continue. This was already so hard, and nothing had happened yet. I need to talk to you about something. Midoriya's eyelashes fluttered, his expression turning into something queasy. He put his pencil down. Oh. Okay. Hitoshi inhaled a breath. You know Bakugo, he stated, not asked. There was no point, he felt. They both knew the truth, he just wanted Midoriya to admit it. He began to shrink almost immediately, his shoulders drooping, and his face paling. I don't want to talk about this, Hitoshi-kun, please. Hitoshi frowned, confused, hurt by his refusal to spare him any details. Why is that so hard for you to answer? It's a yes or no question. Yes, I know him, he replied, short and clipped, refusing to elaborate. Please stop. How? Midoriya exhaled loudly through his mouth, leaning his face into his hands. He was shaking. Why does that matter? I don't want to talk about this. I'm sorry, I can't. That's not fair, Hitoshi insisted emphatically, sitting straighter in his seat, feeling justified in his frustration. You can't just expect me to be okay with whatever you and him have going on. You think I haven't noticed? Midoriya lowered his hands from his face. His expression was pained, so very pained. What are you talking about? We don't have anything going on. What are you trying to say? Hitoshi shrugged diminutively. He didn't want to say it out loud and have his worst fears confirmed. He didn't want it to be true, but he had to know. He had to hear it from Midoriya's mouth. You two have history. You dated each other or something. I don't know. I don't know because you refused to tell me anything. And instead of looking guilty or even apologetic, Midoriya looked disgusted at him. He abruptly stood from the table, his chair screeching against the floor, and snatched his backpack from the ground, throwing his belongings in all at once. Hitoshi stood after him, watching in utter confusion. What are you doing? Where are you going? Home. What? Why? He spluttered, quickly rounding the table and approaching him. This was not supposed to happen. Midoriya wasn't supposed to get upset. Because of what I said? Midoriya, I just want to know the truth. I'm not asking for anything else. Hitoshi reached for him, ached to touch him, to know they were still okay. Midoriya brushed his hand away from him and swung his backpack over his shoulder, completely bypassing him, and towards the front door. Hitoshi watched after him, his confusion quickly expanding into frustration. You're mad at me? He stalked after him, stopping in front of the Genkin, his breathing labored. He was beginning to panic. He couldn't leave now, especially not now. I'm just trying to understand the situation. How does that make me the bad guy? Yes, because this is all about you, Midoriya groused as he stomped into his shoes, the sarcasm not lost on him. Hitoshi scoffed, chest hitching with hurt. What's that supposed to mean? I told you I didn't want to talk about this, and you couldn't respect me enough to listen, he warbled, eyes glassy as he spoke. All because of what? Because you're jealous? Because you think Bakugo and I used to date? You're selfish. You're so selfish. Midoriya was suddenly out the door, walking down the pathway quickly, as if he were trying to get as far away from him as possible. Hitoshi, lost in his anger, followed him, determined to get the last word. And you're a coward. No, wrong. All I was trying to do was have a mature conversation, and you can't even do that. He can. He's scared. You're scaring him. All you do is run away. When things get hard, you give up. That's what you do best. No. Midoriya froze in the middle of the pathway. Hitoshi ached to hug him, to take back everything he'd said, and start over from the beginning. He was an asshole, a massive asshole. This was not how this conversation was supposed to go, believe it or not. Midoriya slowly turned over his shoulder and glared at him, tears streaming down his cheeks, his face bright red, his lips trembling. He didn't say anything. He didn't really need to. He was hurt. Hitoshi had truly hurt him, and there was nothing he could do to fix it in that instant. Midoriya left, and Hitoshi did nothing to stop him. All right, listeners, this concludes Chapter 2 of Spare Change. Chapter 3, the last and final chapter of this fic, will be up next. Let me know your all's thoughts and reactions, and as always, thank you so much for listening.